and good morning again. Happy Saturday to you, my friends. Listen, it's a great day to be alive. If you can hear me, it simply means that you are a survivor and that despite whatever life has thrown at you, you're an overcomer. As a matter of fact, spiritually speaking, we're actually more than overcomers. I want to say welcome this morning to those of you who are joining by Facebook Live. We are certainly glad for your faithfulness and your diligence hanging out with us. And those of you who may be joining us by YouTube, I've come to discover I have a lot of YouTube friends that join us by YouTube. And so we definitely want to say welcome to you as well. And maybe you're joining by way of phone this morning. We say welcome to you. We're just so excited. I want to share quickly with you. We're having a very practical session today, and I'm going to ask you to get on the phone and send this link to somebody who's dealing with some type of traumatic event. Listen, we're going to get started, but let me tell you how you can join us on a Saturday morning first. You can always join us on our Facebook Live family. You can go to Dr. K.O. Williams Space Ministry. That's the Facebook handle. And then you can also go to our YouTube channel, Dr. K.O. Williams Space Ministry as well. You can also, as you see, join us by phone. And in the bottom, I always try to highlight the very fact that you have other challenging questions or coaching series that you'd like to hear some lessons around. You can always communicate directly to us on the bit.ly/RealTalk Your Voice. That is the direct link that puts you right in touch with our team. And you can let us know what other areas that you'd like to have some coaching around. This is a 60-minute session. We go hard in for 60 minutes. Always try to be respectful of your time. Listen, the fact that you gave us 60 minutes is a blessing, and we want to be good stewards of that time. It's every Saturday, but we'd like to be clear about something. We're addressing life's issues. This is straight, honest, and transparent conversation. This is not for immature audiences, and anyone can participate, but we are diligent in making sure that we put some tools in your toolbox. Somebody said, why do you say that? Because when you go to do a job, there are so many different types of jobs that can come up, arise. And isn't it wonderful to have more than one tool? I've tried to do a job and had the wrong tool for the right application. And so it's always better to have choices of the different types of tools. And that's why we're very intentional. Every Saturday, 60 minutes from 9 to 10. And so, again, today is no different. Want to do a little housekeeping if we can. We always try to share something to help somebody else. And so in the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a share button, a like button as well. We're going to ask you to be interactive today. Take that extra step and send us a amen, good morning, hello, I'm in agreement, or say something more, go a little bit deeper. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we are interacting and meeting the needs of our audience. And when you do, I'll give you a shout out just like this. Sister Denise, Farmville, good morning to you all the way down in the Jacksonville, North Carolina area. We're just unlimited on the places to which we can interact with our audiences. And so if you'll give us a little check-in, I promise you we'll give you a shout out as well. We have a very, very practical session today. This session is real specific around a specific charge, and that is giving up is not an option. We are dealing with so many things post-pandemic, and I'm telling you right now that there are so many people in the church, out of the church, in the job, people jobless. Listen, people everywhere are being faced with this question: will you give up? And I want to tell you that the answer is giving up is not an option. What we want to try to do today is to grant you some survival strategies. I'll try to go as far as I can in our session today, making sure that you'll be able to go back and review this a little bit later. And if we get to all 7 we'll certainly try to give you a recap maybe next week. Good morning, Sister Ethel. Fredericks, all the way in the Virginia area. We're certainly thankful for you joining and tuning in with us as well. We're here today to talk about this topic around giving up. I'm telling you, I have just person after person, as late as yesterday, someone was talking to me about just how difficult life is. My friends, I'm telling you right now, I've never seen the level of intensity around people who sometimes are trainers themselves around the term is tenacity, the ability to stick to it when sticking really is not an option. And that's what we're trying to raise today. This notion of don't give up. Giving up is not an option because what's to come is better than what's been. We've got some great practical tools for you today. I'm hopeful that you're going to take some notes, and even better, we fixed it to where you can actually go on our YouTube channel and review this as many times as possible. I want to say it as many times as possible today. My God brother, Joseph Nance Jr., all the way in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, I owe you a phone call. We've been missing each other, but I promise you we're going to make a connection. I'm here to tell Mom I said hello as well. Listen, giving up is not an option. And I want to give you some survival strategies because everybody's situation is different. No two people have the same DNA. And for that reason, we're going to find out that there are so many different ways to respond to the same thing. But the big takeaway is simple. Don't give up. Can I say it one more time with some authority? Don't give up, because giving up is not an option. We're going to give you some survival skills today around what you can do when you find your back against the wall. Now, I want to start by telling you, some people say, listen here, Williams, I'm not about all that doom and gloom talk that you all be talking about. But I want to tell you, I've lived long enough in this life to tell you that there are 3 stages in life. And I promise you, all 3 of them will find their way to your front door. First of all, there's a person who is like just coming out of a storm. You know this person because they're ecstatic. They can't be still. Listen, their mouth is just always talking about the victory that they just overcame. Listen, it's obvious that they are in that phase called coming out of a storm. And you don't have to ask them. 9 times out of 10, they'll make their position real clear to you. And then there is that second phase. Listen, my friend, if you live in this life, you're either coming out of a storm, and then you're either phase 2 is you're in a storm. Listen, there are people that's watching this broadcast even right now. If I said raise your hand if you're in the middle of a storm, we talked about the other week, the fight of your life, stay in the fight. There's somebody in this audience that I'm talking to right now, or who will view this broadcast in the days to come, who will say to me, Williams, you are exactly at my front door. I'm in the midst of the fight of my life. Somebody has lost a job. Somebody has lost a loved one. Somebody has lost their health. I know I'm talking good because it is the part of life that we all go through. The Bible is clear. A man that is born of a woman has but a few days, and those days are full of trouble. I don't care who you are, that there are some people who say, Williams, like, you don't even have to go any further. You're on my row already. That I'm in the middle of a storm. Somebody's in a divorce. Listen, somebody's in the middle of a bad breakup. The reality is I came to tell you giving up is not an option, and that we have some survival strategies for you. Then I want to also tell you that if you're not in a storm, if you're not coming out of one, somebody say you still haven't gotten to my front door, I want to suggest to you, my friend, to brace yourself because you're headed for a storm. There's a storm out on the ocean, the old saints used to say, and it's drifting this away. And if your soul is not anchored in Jesus, you will surely drift away. Drift away, drift away. They would go on to say, if your soul is not anchored in Jesus, you will drift away. My friend, if you're not in a storm, if you're not coming out of one, you better brace yourself, because storms keep coming. I don't know who I'm speaking to on today, but I want to tell you that storms keep coming, and you cannot avoid them. If you are living and breathing, life has a way of finding itself at your front door. So these three positions prompted the lesson today, that there are those who are in the middle of the fight of their lives. And I want to tell you something: giving up is not an option. I cannot say it enough times, because the more you hear, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And so I want to tell you today that giving up is not an option. And we want to give you some survival skills. And so get your pens and paper out. I want to walk you through today a big topic, and it's called traumatic events. Yes, traumatic events. That's really what I want to talk to you about today. That if you live in this life, they just some things that you cannot avoid. Yes, I want to talk to somebody today about traumatic stress. Yes, somebody today is dealing with a traumatic event. A traumatic event is a common term for reactive anxiety or depression. Although it is not, listen, a medical term, it is not included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Medical Disorders. That's the DSM, if you're familiar with that at all. This may result from events that are less threatening and distressing than those that lead to the more bigger medical terms called post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, somebody would ask you, what is a traumatic event? Let's dive deep today, because I want to give you some information, but I also want to give you 7 coping skills to deal with this big topic called traumatic stress. All right. So when you think about a traumatic event, something that is triggered your ability to not handle things in a proper way. Traumatic events include either an actual or possible death or serious injury. These are some basic traumatic events. Again, anything from an actual or possible death. So in other words, somebody passed away in your immediate circle, or in your friends, or in your love circle, and it's caused what we call a traumatic event. It falls now into that traumatic event. Or it could be a near death. I don't know who I'm talking to today, but there are people who have been in an accident. I've been in them myself. And listen, the event was so traumatic until when I got out, I couldn't even really slide a piece of paper between my bumper and the car in front of me. Let me tell you something. I've been in events where I actually had the impact, and the event was so traumatic that it actually caused the vehicle to be totaled. I don't know who I'm talking to, but the reality is it was a serious event. Maybe you say that's not my traumatic event. There are other traumatic events. For example, sexual violence. Listen, there are so many things that can cause us to be thrown into this whirlwind, which we call a traumatic event. Most adults have lived through at least one traumatic event in their lives. I just want you to just do some intra-reflective participation for a moment. Look back in your life. Can you identify a traumatic event in your life? Many have experienced it, but maybe didn't realize what it was. Trauma can also be chronic, meaning that similar events happen many times over a long period of time. Who is it that I'm speaking to? I can give you an example, a person in an abusive relationship. Listen, it's not healthy and it's not godly, number one. Let's just be clear about that. And the reality is that you're in this traumatic event, and it just keeps happening over and over and over again over a long period of time until it becomes a chronic traumatic event. Oh my goodness, I don't know who I'm speaking to today, but I come to give you some coping skills to deal with traumatic events. Listen, I don't really care who you are. Your money can't prevent you from traumatic events. Your status can't prevent you from traumatic events. Listen, I know people who, let me just be clear, money is not an option for them. But if you go down to that cemetery has millionaires and billionaires. It does not discriminate. Trauma has its way of finding itself to our door. Now, the challenge is how do we cope with the challenge? And that's what this coaching series is about today. I want to suggest to you that there are many different types of traumatic events. Let me just list a few in your hearing today. And again, you can go back to this session and view it on the YouTube to get this and in a review form. For example, as we just talked about, there are sexual or physical abuse or assault. I just talked to someone just this week that someone filed a 50B on them trying to get ahead of the system. Listen, it was in the midst of a traumatic event. And so what I try to say to people is no matter who you are, and this person was in ministry, as you can imagine the level of trauma that was inflicted as a result of being served a 50B. That's a restraining order because the person has painted you as this violent person. Let me tell you, trauma is everywhere. Serious vehicle accidents, I told you about that. There are combat or war zone exposures that you'd be surprised at the number of people who have served this country. I talked to a man in the military. I was in the airport this week. He talked about be smart, be alive, or be unsmart and be dead. He said that's a military term. And so just think about the trauma that's constantly on your mind and in your mindset, trying to be always on the alert in combat. Serious medical events, a heart attack, stroke. Listen, I could go on and on. Just the notion around having a medical event. We could tell you about so many different times, seeing death or dead bodies. We know that can create a traumatic event. Death is a very strange thing. You're used to a live, energetic person, and then all of a sudden you see this lifeless corpse just laying there. Listen, it is a traumatic event when you see or either experience a dead body, including while at work. I don't know if you've ever seen anyone lose their life or be transitioned while at work, or even worse, while you're at a worship space. I know people, not me personally, thank God, but I know people who have experienced persons passing away right in the pulpit or right in service. And so these become traumatic events, unexpected death of a loved one, natural disasters. For example, people are still dealing, even as we speak, on the traumatic consequences of COVID-19. For decades and years to come, it'll be a part of people's lives and experiences because of the intensity of the loss and damage of the natural disaster. Arson or house fires. These, I remember early on in our lives, my mom told us that we had a house fire that destroyed many of our personal items. And so, when you think about these things, they triggers in your life, or somebody that's dealing with torture or domestic violence or witnessing or experiencing violence, such as a homicide or suicide, terrorism or mass violence. And as you well know, now the latest trend are these mass shootings. These things create traumatic events in the lives of people. And when these things happen, you need to have a way to recognize the signs and the symptoms, but also ways to deal with coping with these traumas. And so what we're going to deal with today is the emotional responses to traumatic events. We're going to also lift up some signs and symptoms to traumatic stress. And then we'll talk a little bit about dealing with traumatic stress, and finally give you some coping tips for dealing with trauma. So let's get started today. I want to take a moment, if you will, and allow me to give a shout out to Sister Janie up north today. It's always good to see you as well. Listen, let's lift up now some concepts around traumatic stress. First of all, I want to deal with the emotional responses to traumatic stress. It's normal to experience traumatic stress following a disturbing event, whether it's a traffic accident, a plane crash, a violent crime, terrorist acts, or global pandemics, like an earthquake or hurricane, which we've dealt with. You may feel intense, listen to this, shock, confusion, or fear, or feel numb or overwhelmed by a host of conflicting emotions, sometimes even all at one time. All these emotions aren't limited to the people who experience the event. Round the clock news and social media coverage means that while we were bombarded with the horrific images of tragedy, sufferings, and loss almost the instant they occurred anywhere in the world, but when you have repeated exposure, it can overwhelm your nervous system and create traumatic stress, just as if you experienced the event the first hand. So what we know for sure is traumatic stress can shatter your sense of security. Just think about it. You were doing fine, and then bam, here comes this shocking event. It can leave you feeling helpless and vulnerable in a very dangerous world, especially in the traumatic events which was man-made, such as a shooting or an act of terrorism. And when we used to think of an act of terrorism, we would think globally or internationally. But my friends, you and I both have lived long enough now to know that when you turn that TV on, these acts of terrorism are right on our own homeland now, and we have what we call homeland security threats that we have to deal with on a daily basis. Like, listen, you go to church. I want to be real to somebody. When there was a time that we call it God conscious and church conscious. There used to be a time where people would go to church and there just certain things wouldn't happen at the church, but we're seeing it happen more and more now. These acts of terrorism that down in South Carolina, the Global Nine, we know that happened in the AME church. A pastor and members at a Bible study, lives trying to enrich themselves. And while there, experienced a young man sitting in the audience plotting to kill and successfully taking their lives. Listen, we could go on and on and on. The Sandy Hook shooting, about 20 years ago, and people are still in shock. I saw a young lady on the news just recently talking about the trauma of her and her family, how she still has not put the pieces back together in their lives. A child can't even go to school and learn. Listen, I can just go on and on and on. Workplace, terrorism. People got a term now called going postal. I was just talking to a manager in corporate America who had to let an employee go, and they showed me an email where the corporate security had issued a warning across the entire corporate community that this person, they had his picture there, and they had his name, they had disengaged his badge and all that, and said, but everybody should be on heightened alert because the young man was dangerous and just unwilling to accept the decisions and things that had happened within that organization. Listen, my friends, no matter where you are, there are going to be traumatic events, and there are events that we have no control over. So we have to figure out, number one, how to recognize signs and symptoms of these traumatic events. And I want to deal with it today in a way that you may be able to understand. Traumatic events, hear me, make you nervous. They make you anxious. They cause you to be scared. Like, I know people who don't even go outside. I don't know how they live with this. I try to share with them that life is about coping skills, because I heard George Bush say that I will not be a prisoner to fear. Oh my goodness, can I talk to somebody today that in order not to be a victim to fear, you have to have some type of mechanism that will allow you to recognize the signs and symptoms of the traumatic events first. And then you also have to have some type of coping skills. So let's talk about some signs and symptoms. And they, by the way, can range from mild to severe and often come and go in waves. There may be times when you feel jumpy and anxious, for example, and other times when you feel disconnected and numb, all of which are signs and symptoms of traumatic stress. So, emotional symptoms of traumatic stress include shock and belief and disbelief. You have a hard time accepting the reality of what happened. Shock and disbelief. You find yourself having a hard time trying to accept the reality of what happened. Or these feelings of numbness, and you just feel disconnected from your feelings and from your family and friends. That feeling of being disconnected is a very serious warning sign towards emotional stress, trauma stress. Sorry about that. So you also have fear, as you heard me say. You worry that the same thing will happen again, or that you'll lose control and break down. Like, we can't live life in fear of the unknown. That is something that I want to help you to understand, that trauma is everywhere. It's like someone fearing the loss of a loved one. Listen, at best, no one can guarantee anyone the longevity that we all love to experience. All we can do is take advantage of the day. When you wake up, you say, Father, I thank you for me and any loved ones that are here today who made it through the night. Oh my goodness. And I've been found on the wake up list. Who am I talking to on today? Listen, I'm just so happy. So these are some signs and symptoms. Not only do we have shock and disbelief, not only do we have fear, we also have sadness and grief, especially if people died, or different close loved ones or friends and family. And then if maybe they suffered a life-altering consequences. I want to talk to you today about this notion about sadness and grief. I'm going to try to do a session on the 5 stages of grief that I see as a faith leader. So many times people who try to cope with grief and loss, but there are 5 stages. The clinical psychologists all agree that there are 5 stages that you go through. And if you're not familiar with what those stages are, what I find is people getting caught up in this loop, or this what I call the cycle of grief. Like, you're supposed to go through the cycle, but when you get to stage 5, you're down to acceptance and moving forward. And many people get caught up in the loop and they can't get out. They find themselves going around and around and around until it ultimately overcomes them. So this is a warning sign and a symptom associated with traumatic stress. Feeling helpless, the sudden unpredicted nature of a violent crime or accident, the pandemic, as we talked about, all these can leave you feeling vulnerable and helpless. Think about it. The pandemic came and many of us felt helpless, like we saw the effects, but there was absolutely nothing you could do. Over 1 million people lost their lives during the pandemic. Listen, it is something that many of us will never forget in our lifetimes. But you can't live your life thinking, oh my goodness, here comes another pandemic. All you can do is learn to, first of all, recognize the symptoms, and then put in your toolbox some coping skills. And I want to talk about another traumatic stress event. Another feeling that comes is guilt that you survived when others died. Can I talk to you for a moment? You'd be surprised at the number of people who will say in a traumatic event. As a matter of fact, one of the 5 stages of grief is negotiation, that you say to yourself or to God, is there any way that they could come back alive? I would be willing to take their place. Let me tell you, you'd be surprised at the number of people who are caught up. And if you're dealing with those types of emotions, what it means is that you're still caught in this emotional 5 stages, and you need some coaching on how to get you through those 5 stages, because if not, you will be on what they call a belt line, and it will just continually take you through those grief stages without ever coming to some level of closure. And then obviously anger can be associated with this traumatic events that you have. You become angry. Can I be honest with you? Sometimes I find people, they become angry with God. They become angry with the government. Think about this, that during the pandemic, they started cutting off, declining, rejecting resources to people, and people already starving and feeling like they're at the wit end. And then you get dealt the blow of a denied request for some resource that you're trying to make. Listen, I know people that are upset with God. They're upset with the government or others you feel are responsible, or to be prone to emotional outbursts. That's simply to say, out of nowhere, this person makes a lashing out towards God or to the government or to some person that's been really there by your side the whole time. What I want you to understand is when these traumatic events happen, you, like so many people, have these unpredicted events that happen, but then we all have to have some way to bring them into subjection. So first of all, that's some of the symptoms that you should look for when an emotional event happens. I am just so thankful today that I'm coming to the discovery that life is not about what happens. It's about how you deal with what happens. Can I say that again? Life is only 10% what happens, and it's 90% on how you deal with what happens. We all have challenges. If you live in this life, you're going to have them. But the reality is how do you respond to the challenge? And so I want to talk about some physical symptoms as well, because you may have these symptoms and don't even realize that these are manifestations of a traumatic stress. Feeling dizzy or faint, stomach tightening, that's a very keen one, because the anxiety and the stress is such that it has your stomach in knots and churning, excessive sweating, listen, trembling, shaking, experiencing cold sweats. That some people are so overwhelmed by the traumatic events, they have lumps in their throat or feeling choked up. Listen, I have been there. I've experienced it. I know it firsthand that the event was so shocking. It was so breathtaking until I felt like I was swallowing a brick down my throat, trying to get myself together. Rapid breathing, pounding heart, even chest pains and difficulty breathing, racing thoughts. Listen, when you're in a traumatic event, it's difficult to maintain a certain level of normality because you're confronted with something that you didn't even see coming. Being unable to rest or stop pacing, you'd be surprised at the number of people that can't sleep. It's simply because they're still dealing with traumatic stress events. And the reality is you need to identify it first, accept that it happened, and then we're going to give you some coping skills. Listen, changing your sleeping patterns, you're experiencing insomnia, nightmares. Listen, there are so many things that are connected to a traumatic event. When they happen, we can't stop them from happening. We can only control our responses when they happen. Unexplained aches in your body and pains, including headaches, change in your sexual function. Let me tell you something. There's no way you can perform sexually when you've encountered a traumatic event. Listen, it changes there's physical changes, and then there are also emotional changes. There's a loss of increased. Sometimes I've seen it go both ways. When people have traumatic events, sometimes they just totally lose their appetite. You see them losing weight constantly, and you're saying to them, hey, this is not going to work. And they say, I just don't as a pastor, I've been there. I've sat at the bedside and they said to me, Pastor, I don't have an appetite. I just can't eat. And I always say, listen, if you have any plans to stay here, you got to give your body some nutrients, and you get that through food. And so, or you can get it through vitamins, but one way or the other, you're going to have to increase. And then I've seen some people, they have the response to a traumatic event is they're on the other end of the continuum, and that is they have this increased appetite. I mean, it's out of control. They eat to try to numb the pain or whatever, or even worse, I've seen people consume alcohol or nicotine, or even worse, drugs. The reality is, I preach a sermon in Psalm 142. David was running from Saul, and he runs to a cave. Lord have mercy. It was dark, dry, and damp. Dark and damp in this cave. And the reality is, so many people, they run to a place of refuge only for it to become their prison. I want to talk about a traumatic event that drives you to a place to where you're looking for protection only for it to turn into a prison. Somebody say, give me an example, Williams. I'll be too glad to. I know a person that had a traumatic event that happened to them. And what they did, they said to me, Williams, what I found was people told me, why don't you just try to get a little nightcap? That's a drink for those who didn't know what I was talking about. They started drinking alcohol at nighttime. And what ended up happening was it became starting at nighttime to go to bed. And then when they realized it, it became a morning pickup. They started needing that same nightcap now in the morning also. And then it became such a traumatic experience until they found themselves even during the day needing a pickup. But what I said was, it ultimately, what they sought for a place of protection and provision ultimately became their prison, because the person ultimately had to acknowledge that they had turned into an alcoholic. My friends, I'm saying these things because the person had all good intent, but the good intent without some plan, listen, it's going to lead to some other disaster. So these are some physical symptoms that I want to watch my time here today. But they all typically happen, but you have to be careful because sometimes they progress very differently. And as unpleasant as the symptoms of traumatic stress can be, they tend to gradually improve over time, especially if you take steps to care for your emotional health. What that's simply saying is, I want you to think about this. No storm lasts forever. It doesn't matter how traumatic it is if you just keep moving forward. Don't give up. Giving up is not an option. What we're trying to tell you is, if you can just keep moving forward. My dad had this wonderful phrase. He would say, keep your foot on the gas pedal. And as long as it's on the gas pedal, despite how slow you may be going, I promise you, you'll still keep making progress. My friends, I'm here today to tell you that stress and trauma happens. We can't prevent it. All we can do is learn how to feel that we are in a place that we accepted it for what it is. And now we're on to the intervention stage of feeling, how do I cope with this situation? So I want to talk to you today about this notion, dealing with traumatic stress. That's what I want to spend the remainder of my time on today, dealing with traumatic stress. And so when we look at this notion of stress, I want to tell you that there are so many people, good, honest, straightforward people, who have found themselves, listen, in a very, very uncomfortable situation. Life happens, you get up, and as I tell people as a pastor, the difference one phone call can make. Like, you can be having a great day, you can be on an upbeat day, and then your cell phone rings, and on the other end of that call is the most traumatic news you have ever had. Matter of fact, it was news you weren't even anticipating. And so when that happens, I want to tell you that there are ways that you can get through it. You can get through it. My friend, you will get through it. I tell you right now, just don't give up. Can I talk to somebody today? You ought to just remind yourself that better days are coming. If I had time, I would go through all my affirmations with you that weeping endure for a night, my friend, but joy will come in the morning if you can just make it to the morning. Don't give up. Listen, one of my favorite gospel songs is by the late Reverend James Cleveland. I don't feel no ways tired. Come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me that the road would be easy, but I just don't believe he brought me this far just to leave me. Now, I want to encourage somebody today that traumatic events happen, and you have to find that positive affirmation. For example, behind every dark cloud is a silver lining. Let me tell you that the sun will shine again. You just keep going and don't give up. Listen, there are those who will encourage you to give up, try to give you every reason to throw in the towel. But I want to tell you, don't throw in the towel. Just give God a chance. Just keep going and don't give up. And now, as we take a look at some ways to deal with this trauma and these traumatic stresses, just as it can often take time to clear the rubble and the repair of damages following a disaster. Think about this. This event happened and it hit you so hard that it kind of threw you off your game. Just like the pandemic, we're going into 4 years in, and people are still trying to pick up the pieces. My friend, it doesn't happen overnight. And so what I want to tell you is sometimes the repair process. Can I talk with you for a moment around the repair process? Even though there's damage, the repair process typically is a timeline event. What that means is over the course of time, you begin to deal and accept it. Sometimes you never get over it, but you learn to deal with it over time. I don't know who I'm talking to, but the equilibrium of your emotions and the rebuild for your life is a fine balance. But there are specific things, my friend, that you can do to help yourself or loved ones cope with this emotion aftermath, I call it, of trauma. Because see, here's the thing: it's one thing to have the event, but then we have to deal with the aftermath and find a way to move forward with your life. And I want you to remember something, that there are no right or wrong ways to feel. When you get that call or that event or that disaster, there's no right or wrong way to feel. People react in different ways to trauma. So don't tell yourself what you should be thinking, feeling, or doing. Don't ignore your feelings. That's another thing. It will only slow down the recovery process. And I tell people sometimes who are caught up, in the religious beliefs, they say, I'm not claiming it. Well, you don't have to claim it. The reality is someone died. And it better you to figure out how to deal with that grief process than to sit there and act in denial. As a pastor, one of the biggest challenges in the grief process is trying to help the loved person realize their loved one has transitioned. And we use that term, but they tell you when you're really in the immediate stages, you have to use terms like death, died, terminated, so that the person can start the process of realizing that something traumatic has happened. And you cannot ignore the feelings. Neither can you ignore the fact that it happened. Avoid obsessive reliving the traumatic event. So like, I know a lady, I met her at an altar at a revival one time, and she came up to the altar for prayer. I want you to listen to this story. My time is drawing near, but I want you to listen to this story. This lady, she came up for prayer and she says, I want to pray because I have a very bad relationship. My husband, she went through this long line, was abusive. He wouldn't bring his money home, and womanizing, had all these women across town. And, she just went on down this whole long list. She was lonely. She talked about how she felt. She was depressed. And so I said, well, you might want to try to get do you think he would go to a marriage counseling session or something? I'm trying to talk with her at the altar. My friends, can I tell you that, as a faith leader, I know how to ask the tough questions. And so I said, is he here? I mean, is he in the service now? And she said these words, no, we're divorced, been divorced 15 years. I said, what? Well, I'm a counselor, right? So I realized at that moment that she was reliving the trauma. Instead of trying to pick up the pieces and move forward, my friend, one of the ways of dealing with trauma is you cannot relive the event over and over and over. She told that narrative like she was in the midst of it right then. And so I want to submit to you today that one of the ways of dealing with trauma is realizing that there's no right or way to feel about it. Don't ignore your feelings about it. And then don't be obsessively reliving the traumatic event, making it harder to think clearly. Partake in activities to keep your mind occupied. My friend, read positive books, self-care, self-help books, watch a movie, cook favorite food that will inspire you, or play with your kids or family or friends, so you don't be dedicating all of your energy and attention to the traumatic event. Now, my time is drawing close today. I want to tell you, good morning again, my good preaching friend, Reverend Black. Always good to have you with you. And for example, Sister Denise raises a very important point. She says, Father's Day is still difficult for me after 6 years of my dad being gone. And what I try to tell people in a very simplistic way is that when you're dealing with grief, what all the research says is you have to find something meaningful to honor and make tribute to the person that you love. For example, I had someone lose a loved one that was, it was an unexpected death. And I got the call to go to the hospital. It was just unexpected. And it was just unexpected. And when I got there, the loved one had already transitioned away. They were strong members, in their faith was strong, but the lady said, Reverend, I can't get through this one. And I said to her that if you have any passion and love for your loved one, what you have to do is to create a legacy in their honor. They said, what do you mean by that? For example, take a day out of the month each month and go to a school and read to children in the honor of your loved one. So what you're doing is attaching some positive activity to the energy of the loss. Or you can go down once a week or once a month, whatever the frequency you desire, and you can create a legacy of feeding the homeless and the hungry. Let me tell you, my friends, one of the best ways to move in that grief cycle is to inspire someone else. It is a clinical proven therapy that when you help other people, there is energy that is released inside of you. I don't know if you know that or not. And so what ends up happening is that energy is replicated the more you do it. And so therefore you find that when you go to that school and read to that child, or when you go to that homeless shelter and feed that person. Or how about this one? Go to a nursing home and go down there and provide a small interactive session with those seniors. I promise you, they will not reject you, because many of them, no one is coming by to check on them anyway. I've done that as well. And I'm telling you right now, you want to talk about feeling revived and refreshed. It is a wonderful adage. Let me say it this way. I live by this mantra right here. May this help somebody. The mantra is called servant leadership. And it simply says this: we are all tenants down here on this earth, and the rent we pay is our service that we give. So it is simple that when you give service to someone, reading that book to that child who thought no one cared about them, going down, putting that food on that plate to that homeless person, or going down to that senior center and reading a book or singing a hymn. As a matter of fact, I would go down there and play, and some of them say, listen, play my song. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll play and you sing. They couldn't sing a lick, but in their mind, they were singing, oh my God, like the angels from on high. You'd be surprised at the gift of giving. It just keeps on giving. So therefore, I'm saying to you, Sister Denise, as well as others, that when you associate something positive along with the legacy of the person, it will keep the legacy alive, but in a positive way. And this is the thing we have to always keep in mind, that trauma happens. There is no preventing. There is no magic formula. There is no way for you to avoid it. If you live, breathe, you're going to have traumatic events. Now, the challenge becomes, do you have coping skills? Now, my time is about up for today, but I do want to at least acknowledge the 7 coping skills. We'll try to dive deeper into this on next week, talking about the 7 tips for coping with trauma. And so I want to give them to you now so that you can start with the process. Number 1 is minimize media exposure. We'll talk about these a little bit more on next week. Sometimes being in the media, listen, some of that stuff is fake. We call it fake news. And the reality is everything you see on TV is not true. We'll talk about that more next time. The second one is real simple. Accept your feelings. The one thing you cannot do is deny that it hurt. You cannot deny that you're sad. You cannot deny that you feel this void. Whatever the feelings are, learn to vocalize them and make those audible. Number 3, we're going to give you some examples about all this next week. Number 3 is challenge your sense of helplessness. In other words, don't allow yourself to feel like you're helpless and there's nothing. There is something you can do, and there are lots of things that you can do. But when the traumatic event happens, many times it makes you feel like you're helpless. Number 4, get moving. Yes, listen. I want to put my weight on this one, because sometimes people after the traumatic event, they don't want to move. And you can talk till the Jesus come back. The reality is they do not want to move. I got to move past that. But I want to put my weight on that one when we go back further. Get moving. Get up from there and get moving. And then tip number 5 is reach out to others. There are so many people who are standing ready and willing to be able to help you, to be a part of your circle of help, your network circle, your therapy circle. I'm going to challenge you to start. For example, if you are a alcoholic, you know that there are support systems and support groups that you can sign up for, or start a group. My goodness, who am I talking to today? Get up from there. And one thing you can do is start a support group for those in that area. Number 6 is make stress reduction a priority. Like, you got to make sure that every day you get up, you find a way to reduce that stress. Your body wasn't designed for stress. And when the stress comes, your body releases negative enzymes. Hear me when I say these words. You cannot stay under stress and be healthy. Your body medically produces enzymes. We'll talk about them. I have talked about them in the past, but what happens is when those negative enzymes comes, it's working against your health, my friend. And then finally, number 7, eat and sleep well. Listen, find a way to get those healthy nutrients and energy to your body. Your body needs as much fighting power as possible. And so I'm going to ask you to help me to revisit those next week. That's all the time I have for this session today. I hope and pray that we put some tools in your toolbox to help you to understand that life is worth living and giving up is not an option. There are survival strategies that you can use. Now, it's yours. I cannot implement them for you. I can give you the tools, but it's yours to implement, as well as you can give me tools, but I ultimately have to implement them. To everyone today, thank you so much for joining. This is all the time we have. I'm saying to you in my closing to you today that giving up is not an option. There are so many strategies that you can use. Can I pray with you today as we close our session? Father, we thank you now for time well spent in this social media session. I pray that somebody's been inspired, informed, and even educated on today on ways to move past this thing called traumatic events. We're asking, Lord, that the words of our mouth and the meditation of our heart will be accepted in thy sight. Oh Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. As we close this session, empower someone today to take charge of their own lives. Help them to be good stewards, to say that I'm not going to give up, but I'm going to find strategies to survive. This is my prayer in your son, Jesus' mighty name we pray. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. May God be gracious unto you, and may God give you peace until we meet again. Remember that life is worth living. Just don't give up. Brighter days are ahead. God bless you.